Hey, welcome into the program. This is Breaking the Huddle. I'm Joel Klatt. This show is brought to you by Dr. Pepper. It is the one fans deserve. Lots to get into now that we finally have our Final Four in the college football playoff. We've got some new coaching news to get to. There's a lot to get to. This time of year, never a dull moment in college football. So let's get right into it, and let's look at what the College Football Playoff Committee gave to us as far as the top four and what we'll have in this playoff. Number one is Georgia. That was really no surprise. Number two was Michigan. No surprise, in particular after each of them won their respective conference championship games. Then the drama ensued, in particular with USC's loss, TCU's loss. There was some question about what was it going to look like? What was the seeding going to look like? Was Alabama going to find themselves in the playoff? But as I said last Saturday night on the Big Ten championship game, this is the seeding that I thought was going to happen, and it did. TCU is 3, Ohio State is 4, Bama first one out, and Tennessee at 6. By the way, committee, I thought you probably should have just thrown Tennessee above Alabama. Why? Because they beat them. Same record, they beat them, and I understand that 23-point loss is not great, but the head-to-head should at some point come into this. Let me talk briefly just on each of the top 4 teams that are going into the playoff, and then some questions and some things that I was just on my mind. Let's start with Georgia. This Georgia team is really good. I mean, this Georgia team has been the best team in college football over the last 18 months. They've got the top record in college football over the last 18 months. They are the defending national champion, and they should be number one. You know, even though they don't have the top-end win like Michigan does, this is a team that is outstanding, and they're good defensively. They're very good offensively. Good quarterback in Stetson Bennett. They're smart situationally, like you see right here after that blocked field goal, and then LSU doesn't cover it, and then boom, they take off. They scored 50 points against LSU. Now, having said all that, let me just ask you this question. Of the possible outcomes that could have happened last week in conference championship week for Georgia, and I'm talking about really there were 4 teams that they would potentially get matched up against in the first round of the playoff. USC, TCU, Michigan, and Ohio State. That was really like whatever way you cut it, that was the potential for, like, who are you going to play in that first round? And they get matched up with Ohio State. And I think that you could say that of those 4, aren't the Buckeyes the one that matches up best with Georgia? Now, listen, Georgia's going to be favored, and rightly so, and I'm probably going to end up picking Georgia. But of those 4 teams, don't you think that they got the hardest draw? See, I kind of think that they do. So what did they get rewarded with for being the defending national champion, for being the number 1 seed? Really, the biggest thing that they got is that they get to play at home. So they play in Atlanta in the Peach Bowl, but they get what I feel like was the toughest possible draw from any of the outcomes that could have happened after conference championship week. So they'll play the Buckeyes in the semifinal. Then you look at Michigan. Now, Michigan is number 2 in the country. And by the way, it's kind of appropriate that they are number 2, because in that same 18-month period that I was just talking about for Georgia, you know, the second best team in the country as far as the record goes has been Michigan. So in the last 27 games, Georgia is 27-1, and Michigan is, 27 games, 26-1, and Michigan is 25-2. So these 2 teams now are the top 2 seeds, and they're the 2 best teams in college football over that lengthy period of time. And this Michigan team feels like it's evolved a little bit even during the course of this season. Remember, after all of those guys left, after last year's team did what they were able to do, beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten championship, make the playoff, then they had those guys leave, in particular on the defensive side. You thought to yourself, at least I did, like, are they going to be as good? Guess what? They actually are better. Statistically, they are better. Offensively, they're better. Defensively, they're better. They're just a little bit different. So now this Michigan team, as opposed to what they were a year ago, or even, you know, let's face it, in September and early October this season, they're more reliant on the big play on the offensive side, those long explosive rushes from Donovan Edwards in the last couple of weeks in particular, and the big plays from J.J. McCarthy throwing the football. And then on the flip side, defensively, it's more of a bend, don't break style of defense. So it's less dominant, let's say, with the pass rush, but it's bend, don't break, and then they get stops in the red zone. That's been their key. In fact, in the last 10 times that this defense has faced a red zone possession from the opposing offense, They've only allowed 2 touchdowns. That's very good. They're number 3 in the country in terms of touchdown red zone defense. All right, quickly on TCU and Ohio State. For TCU, that's a bit of a gut punch loss for them in that Big 12 championship game. I know that they still get to go to the college football playoff, and good for them. But listen, Max Duggan willed that team all the way down the field a couple of times. He deserves to touch the ball on 3rd and 4th down. Quarterback sneak is an indefensible play inside of a yard. And the fact that they didn't sneak that's going to eat at Garrett Riley, their offensive coordinator. Ohio State now. Ohio State at number 4. It just begs the question, do we feel like Ohio State is playing with house money and some freedom, or do we feel like they're under an immense amount of pressure, specifically Ryan Day? In the fishbowl of Columbus and amongst Buckeye fans, they would say pressure. Like, he's got to win. They've got to do it. You know, that's the standard. That's the expectation. And yet, on the outside looking in, don't we feel like they're the underdogs? They weren't supposed to get here. South Carolina was not supposed to beat Clemson. You know, I mean, USC ends up losing. This is house money. See, in my estimation, the Buckeyes have the freedom to go cut it loose, and that's when they play their best. Ohio State, when they're playing their best, going back to when Ryan Day first became the head coach, it's when they cut it loose, when they play aggressive. They played aggressive in a couple of those games, in big games, early against Michigan in Ryan Day's tenure, in the playoff games, by the way, the second one in particular against Clemson. If they go cut it loose, they're going to be really dangerous for Georgia, okay? Georgia's the best team in the country, but that's an interesting matchup with Ohio State. Lastly, before we get out of here and we move on, I just want to bring up, this is what we can look forward to in the future, folks, is the 12-team playoff. This is exactly what it would look like, and I'm here for it. There's some tweaks that I would make, like, listen, I don't think in the first round we should get a conference matchup. So that Ohio State-Penn State, I would play with the seeding a little bit. And then the most important part, folks, it wouldn't be a straight bracket like this in my estimation. We would do it more like the NFL, and we would reseed after every single round. That way, if you get the number 1 or number 2 seed overall, then you're going to have the easiest path to the national championship game. Okay, when we come back, we've got to talk about the coaching carousel, and then specifically the University of Colorado. How about that? It is prime time in Boulder. We talk about the Buffs when we come back.
I have one of the best coaching staffs assembled, some of the best scouts, some of the best kids that we're recruiting, and commitments already coming on the way as I speak. And now that I've gotten here and I see it, and I understand it, Rick, and I can grasp it, and I can touch it, and I can feel it, and I can taste it, I truly understand what you want. All you want is an opportunity to win, to compete, to dominate, to be amongst the elite, to be amongst the best. And darn it, I'm going to give you that.
Man, what a powerful press conference it was in Boulder as Deion Sanders was announced as the new head coach at the University of Colorado. So there is not a splashier hire in the country, and I will tell you that any president and athletic director that are going through this, hiring a coach, there's not a more important hire at a university than the head coach. And getting it right matters. You've got to get it right, not just for the quality of your football program, but also the health of your institution. Now, some would disagree with me on this, but the most important hire, in my estimation, that any institution can make is their head football coach. He is, in large part, the football program. It's like the quarterback in the NFL. And the football program is, in large part, the front porch of the institution. Okay, so this is your entry point into everybody's living room in the country is the football program. And there's time and time again, you can look at examples of the way that coaches and the success of a football program has positively impacted a school. I mean, I've given the Alabama analogy before. Alabama's institution, just their academic side, they've risen their capacity about 50%. Okay, so the size of their school has grown substantially since Nick Saban became their head coach. Well, when you take a look at all of those extra students, now every single year paying tuition, both in-state and out-of-state. If you average that out to right about $18,000, $19,000 per year, which is a conservative estimate, well, that's over $250 million annually that you can say happened because their football program has been the preeminent football program in the country over the course of the last decade. Well, through that lens, you look at what Deion Sanders could mean to the University of Colorado, and I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that Deion could mean hundreds of millions of dollars to the institution, both the institution and the athletic department. Okay, so then that's just from the institution standpoint. Now you get down to the athletics department. I can tell you for a fact, Colorado has raised more money in the last week than they have been able to in really the last 6 months or year. They've sold more season tickets already for next season than they have in the last few seasons. All right, there's waiting lists now for all the boxes and the suites. That place is going to be packed. That's an important thing when you're talking about the perception and the momentum for a program. And then you get down to the program itself. All right, and what is it that Deion Sanders gives this program? And you know what it is? Relevance. Because every show in America, this one included, is going to be talking about Deion Sanders. They're going to have an opinion on Deion Sanders. Colorado is going to be, and has been for the better part of the last 72 hours, the most relevant program in college football in the whole country. Because we don't have games this week outside of Army-Navy. We're talking about the Heisman and the playoff and everything. And what else? Colorado. That's how important it is that Deion Sanders was hired by the athletic director, Rick George. And now it becomes about recruiting. Okay, so now that you've got all of this exposure and you're that relevant, now it becomes, can you go and recruit and get the players necessary to come in and play at the top end of college football? And I got to tell you, you're already starting to see these commitments roll in. A five-star kid, granted in 2025, bam, he committed. You're going to get transfer portal access. You're going to get a better roster, just period. We all know it. You know why? Because every kid in the country, when he gets a text or a DM from Deion Sanders, he's returning it. And there's probably at least, at a minimum, some level of curiosity for him and his family to go out and visit. And I can tell you this from experience. The superpower of Boulder, Colorado is once you're there. It's beautiful. It's stunning. You get there and it's like, oh, yeah, I could play here. And that's what he gives you. You know why? Because he's one of one. Deion is one of one in the coaching world. There's nobody like him at all. And now he's going to have the ability to go out there and get the players necessary to compete at a higher level, which leads me to that speech that he gave his players. You heard it. I don't have to play it. He said, listen, you hit that portal, you existing Buffaloes. Hit that portal because I'm bringing my luggage, and it's Louis, he said. First of all, what an amazing line. Second of all, what's he supposed to do? He's not going to be able to turn that roster into all of a sudden a bowl roster next year. That's a 1-11 roster. That's a roster that is not very good. The commitments that they had for next year, everyone's like, they're not honoring their scholarships. Exactly. That's the point. I mean, folks, they're 1-11. They're largely one of, if not the worst Power 5 program in the country, and they have been for the better part of 15 years. So Deion's changing that, and you have to change that not just because you win the press conference, but by bringing in great players. That's the lifeblood of college football, recruiting. Well, guess what? You got to have space for those guys. So Deion's doing exactly what he needs to do to get back on a competitive level in college football. He's got to clear space on that roster so that he can bring in as many kids as possible that can come in there and possibly win football games. I, for one, am very excited, obviously. I mean, I'm a Colorado alum, and I've been waiting for this program to do something special for a long time, and this was a huge swing, and I'm here for it. I'm definitely here for it, and hopefully Gus and I get to go call one of those games early next season because that place is going to be on fire. Okay, when we come back, let's talk about what Deion is going to have to hit and all the coaches around the country are going to have to hit. That's the transfer portal. Thoughts on the portal when we come back. All right, the transfer portal, ladies and gentlemen. This is, well, right now it's the biggest thing going on in college football is this portal. And so we got to figure it out, right? And first and foremost, is there any way to, like, solve the inherent issues in the portal? Probably not. But I will tell you that this is becoming the most impactful thing in the sport, even more so than NIL. And I know that the two can be linked at times and often are. But the transfer portal has impacted college football in immeasurable ways during the course of the last really year and 2 years. You think about like some of the remarkable turnarounds that some of these programs have had, and it's not just because they hired new coaches, it's because they brought in new players. You look at what you've got at USC. I think that's obviously the going to be the case study. Years and years from now, we're going to look back on the transfer portal and say, remember when USC went from 4-8 to 10-2, 11-2. Getting to the conference championship game, Caleb Williams likely winning the Heisman Trophy, and it was he, along with Jordan Addison and others, that transferred in and just totally remade USC. There was others, by the way. This one didn't get as much love. How about Washington? Michael Penix transfers in, leads the country in passing, totally transformed Washington. They went from 4-8 to 10-2. You've got Oregon with a first-year coach in Dan Lanning, and Bo Nix transfers in, and they had a remarkable year. Tennessee, I know it wasn't this year, but think of how quickly that place was turned around, in large part because of Hendon Hooker. So this was a team that was 3-7 in 2020, Pruitt's last year, then went 7-6 with Hooker last year, and now 10-2. And they were one bad performance away. South Carolina, for goodness sakes. I mean, I know this is like salt in the wound for Tennessee fans, but my goodness, all you had to do was beat South Carolina, and you're going to go to the playoff. They would have absolutely gone to the playoff ahead of Ohio State if they just win that game, and they weren't able to do so. But I'm telling you, like, the impact of the transfer portal is immense right now. It's immeasurable. Therefore, if you're a college football coach or a program, I've seen a lot of guys out there, and some have hesitation about the portal. Some are diving in head first into the portal like a swan dive. I will just tell you this. This reminds me a lot of the arms race of the early 2000s, 2005 to 2011, right in there, 2012, when it was like, listen, you have to build a new facility. You have to invest into your program. You've got to invest into the infrastructure, both in terms of brick and mortar and the human capital of what's going on in terms of the staff size and what you're providing your student athlete. There were teams that were able to do it. They adapted, and then they succeeded. Places like Alabama and Clemson and a lot of other places. And then there were places that didn't, and they died, and they're still trying to climb out of it. Places like Texas, Miami, Florida State, USC to some extent, right? These are the places that didn't adapt to the arms race. So I'm just telling you right now, those of you out there that don't want to adapt to the transfer portal, you will die. Adapt or die. And I will just tell you this. I'm going to be really surprised if there's not a massive name in the portal after the playoff. I think that we're in for something that we've never seen before this offseason. I just sense it. I feel it. I've heard rumblings here and there. I think that there might be a massive name on the move, and that will just continue to cement the way that the portal is impacting and will impact college football moving forward. It's here, so we better put our arms around it and adapt, or you will die. Again, there's been case studies of this already. The arms race passed some people up, and those schools. I hope I mentioned Texas, because they're certainly in that as well. They did not adapt, and they died for the better part of a decade. And now it's time to adapt to the transfer portal. All right, when we come back, let's get a little Klattback before we finish things up here on Breaking the Huddle. All right, let's get out to the Twitter sphere, if you will, and get a little Klattback going, because some people are taking exception with some of my thoughts and tweets during the course of the week. Let's get out there. Let's check it out. Okay, Aaron King says, and it looks like he's a Braves fan, so he's going to be mad at me about my take on Stetson Bennett, I'm sure, in the Heisman. Bad take, Joel. First of all, you have to understand, I sent out a tweet that basically said, like, hey, congratulations to all the finalists, Stetson Bennett being one of them, C.J. Stroud, Caleb Williams, and Max Duggan, and then I was surprised that Bennett was included with some omissions. I felt like now you open up the door to some snubs. Guys like Hendon Hooker, by the way, who was voted first team all SEC, or Blake Corum, or Michael Penix, to name a few. So now he says, bad take, Joel. I just lost a lot of respect for you. The Heisman community would be blessed to have a representative with half the heart and determination Stetson has shown in his football career. Shame on you for calling him out like this. You are part of the problem. I respectfully disagree, Aaron. I'm not part of the problem. The award is not about heart and determination. It's about the most outstanding player in college football. And while I feel like Stetson is an outstanding player, he's an outlier right now as a Heisman finalist. If you look at since Cam Newton, right, 2010, since that year, the average quarterback finalist, okay, Heisman finalist that is a quarterback, has somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's see, 42 total touchdowns and 34 passing touchdowns. Stetson has 20 passing touchdowns and 27 total touchdowns. So it's an outlier, in particular when you're looking at a year in which Hendon Hooker was voted first-team All-SEC from his own conference. Blake Corum had 1,400 yards rushing. Bijan Robinson had almost 1,900 yards from scrimmage. Michael Penix led the nation in passing. At some point, this became a little bit of a career achievement award. So why not at least include the fifth guy, right? So listen, Stetson Bennett, phenomenal player. I really love his game, his heart, his work ethic, his entire story. He's a defending national champion. But him to be included in a four-man finalist list and some of these omissions, I felt like was a mistake. And that's all I would say about that. All right, that'll do it for today's show. This has been Breaking the Huddle. The show, as always, brought to you by Dr. Pepper. It is the one fans deserve.